The two climbers were Callum Reese and Jonas Berger. Callum was 34 years old. Jonas was 31. They were roped together on the descent from Annapurna's summit when the upper snowfield fractured at 11:47 in the morning on October 9th. The slab that released was approximately 60 meters wide. It moved fast. Both men were swept off the ridge within seconds of each other. Callum's body was found 2 days later at 6,100 meters. Jonas was never recovered. The rope that connected them was still intact when rescuers reached Callum. It hadn't snapped. It hadn't failed. It was simply attached to a man who was already dead and another man who was gone entirely. Most people who hear this story focus on the rope. They ask whether the rope made it worse, whether one man dragged the other, whether being roped together turned a survivable fall into a fatal one. That's the wrong question. The right question is why they were on that slope at all at that time, in those conditions, after everything they'd already been told. And the answer to that question involves not just Callum and Jonas, but an expedition leader named Marcus Veld, a base camp meteorologist whose report was received and then quietly set aside, and a commercial expedition company that had already sent 2 teams up the same route that week, despite knowing what the snow conditions were doing. Here is the strongest thing you need to understand before anything else. The investigation that followed this disaster found that the avalanche zone had been correctly identified in a forecast distributed to all expeditions on the south side of Annapurna the morning before the descent. Every team received it. The forecast used the phrase, high probability of slab release above 6,500 meters on south-facing aspects. The corridor Callum and Jonas descended sits at 6,800 meters. It faces south. Marcus Veld received that forecast at 4:53 in the morning. The descent began at 10:30. That gap, those 5 hours and 37 minutes between the warning and the moment 2 men walked into the thing they'd been warned about, is where this story actually lives. Callum Reese wasn't careless. He wasn't chasing social media. He wasn't an amateur who didn't know the risks. He'd summited 3 8,000ers before Annapurna. He turned back twice on previous attempts when conditions weren't right. People who climbed with him described him as methodical, careful, the kind of climber who checked snow conditions obsessively and pushed back when he thought something was wrong. Jonas Berger had less experience at extreme altitude, but he trusted Callum, and Callum trusted Marcus. That chain of trust and where it broke is the thing that defines everything about this disaster. There's one more thing you need to know before we go further. Dawa Tenzin, the Sherpa who watched the avalanche from Camp 3, gave a statement to the investigation team 4 months after the disaster. His statement included one line that never made it into the official summary report, one line that the expedition company's legal team argued was speculative and unsupported. That line was this: Mr. Veld knew the route was dangerous. I told him myself the night before. He told me the clients had paid for a summit, and he wasn't going to send them down without one. The investigation summary called that claim unverifiable. 3 witnesses heard the same conversation. None of them were contacted by the investigation team. By the time you finish this, you'll know everything about Callum Reese and Jonas Berger, who they were, what drove them to Annapurna, and exactly what happened in those final hours. You'll know what the investigation found, and what it deliberately avoided finding. You'll know where Marcus Veld is now, and you'll know what Dawa Tenzin did next. The rope didn't run out on that descent, but everything else did. To understand why Callum and Jonas were on that slope at that specific moment, you need to know who each of them was before Annapurna. Because the choices that killed them weren't made on the mountain. They were made long before either of them ever left home. Chapter 2. Who they were before the mountain. Callum Reese grew up in a small coastal town in western Scotland. His father was a fisherman, his mother taught primary school. He didn't touch a mountain until he was 22 years old, when a university friend dragged him to the Cairngorms for a weekend, and he discovered, as he later wrote in a climbing journal entry his family shared with investigators, that height makes everything make sense. He was 34 when he died. He had a younger sister named Fiona who called him every Sunday without fail. He had a dog named Brick. He had a 1-bedroom flat in Edinburgh full of gear he'd owned for a decade because he couldn't bring himself to replace things that still worked. His ex-partner described him as someone who was methodical to the point of infuriating. She meant it as a compliment. She also said he had never once taken a risk he hadn't first spent hours calculating. Callum's 3 previous 8,000er summits were Cho Oyu, Manaslu, and Dhaulagiri. On all 3, he'd descended without incident. On Manaslu, he'd turned back 200 meters from the summit because his partner showed signs of haste, and he made the call without hesitation. He left the summit behind. He brought his partner home. That decision, the ability to walk away, was supposed to be one of his defining qualities as a climber. It's part of what made what happened on Annapurna so hard for everyone who knew him to accept. Jonas Berger was different. He was 31 years old. He was born in Stuttgart, Germany, to a retired engineer and a concert pianist. He'd played competitive chess until his mid-20s. He discovered high-altitude climbing through a documentary he watched during a 2-week illness and described the experience to his mother as the first time I've ever seen something and known I had to do it. Jonas had one previous 8,000er. He'd summited Broad Peak 18 months before Annapurna as part of a guided group. He'd performed well, no problems. He came home and started planning his next expedition within 3 weeks. Annapurna was a step up. A significant one. Annapurna has one of the highest fatality rates of any 8,000er. Jonas knew this. He'd researched it thoroughly. He'd written a document found on his laptop after the disaster, in which he listed every major incident on the mountain over the previous 20 years, categorized by cause, and identified what he believed were the controllable risk factors. One of the items on his list was ignoring avalanche forecasts. He had underlined it. Jonas trusted Callum because Callum had been on 3 of these mountains and come back from all 3. He trusted that if something was wrong, Callum would say so. He trusted the chain. And Callum trusted Marcus. Marcus Veld was the expedition leader. He ran a commercial guiding company called Summit Arc, registered in the Netherlands. He'd been operating commercial Himalayan expeditions for 11 years. He'd guided clients to the summit of Everest, Makalu, and Kangchenjunga. He had a reputation in guiding circles as someone who pushed hard but delivered results. His company had a 91% summit success rate across its advertised expeditions. That statistic was on the Summit Arc website homepage the week of the disaster. It was quietly removed 3 months later. Callum and Jonas had each paid 42,000 euros for their spots on the Annapurna expedition. That included permits, logistics, Sherpa support, and guiding fees. The expedition group totaled 6 clients. Callum and Jonas were the 2 who would attempt the summit that day. The other 4 had turned back at different points over the previous week due to altitude issues or personal decisions. The remaining 4 were alive when the avalanche happened. There's a detail about Callum that his sister Fiona shared publicly in a written statement 8 months after the disaster. She said that in his last phone call home, the night before the descent, he told her he was not completely comfortable with the conditions, but that Marcus had reviewed everything and given the go-ahead. He told Fiona, "Marcus knows this mountain better than I do. I'm trusting him on this one." That was the only time in Callum's climbing career that his sister could remember him deferring his own judgment to someone else's. Jonas sent a voice message to his mother the same evening. He said he was excited. He said the summit had been incredible. He said he couldn't wait to get down and call her properly. He told her he loved her. The message lasted 47 seconds. Neither Callum nor Jonas had any reason to believe the next morning's descent would be anything other than a controlled, careful journey back to Camp 3. They'd summited cleanly. They were tired, but functional. The weather, by all visible measures, from their position, looked acceptable. What they didn't know was what had arrived in Marcus Veld's email inbox at 4:53 that morning. What they didn't know was what Dawa Tenzin had said to Marcus at Camp 3 the night before. What they didn't know was that 3 other Sherpas on the mountain had already independently chosen not to ascend into that corridor that day. 3 experienced high-altitude workers looked at the same slope Callum and Jonas were about to descend. All 3 refused to use it. None of their clients were told. The decisions that were about to kill 2 men weren't made on the descent. They were made the night before, in a tent at Camp 3, while Callum and Jonas slept. What Marcus Veld decided in that tent, and why he decided it, is where everything falls apart. Chapter 3. The decision that was already made October 8th, 9:45 at night. Camp 3, on Annapurna's south side, at approximately 7,200 meters. Marcus Veld was not sleeping. He was sitting with his satellite device, reviewing the meteorological report that had arrived from the base camp team's contracted forecaster, a Norwegian analyst named Erik Solberg, who worked remotely and had been providing daily updates for the expedition since September 22nd. Solberg's report for October 9th was clear. It flagged southwest-facing and south-facing slopes above 6,500 meters as high risk for slab avalanche release. It rated the risk as a 4 on a 5-point scale. A 4 means high. A 4 on an 8,000er at 7,200 meters during post-summit descent in a corridor already loaded by 3 days of wind-deposited snow means something specific. It means, don't go there. Marcus read the report. He responded to Solberg with a single message. Noted. We'll reassess at dawn. He did not wake Callum. He did not wake Jonas. He did not consult Dawa Tenzin, who was in the adjacent tent and had already told him earlier that evening that the descent corridor didn't feel right. Dawa had used those exact words, didn't feel right. Marcus had thanked him and said he'd keep it in mind. At 5:15 in the morning on October 9th, Marcus stepped out of his tent. He looked at the sky. No precipitation. Visibility was good. Wind was light at that altitude. He checked no additional data. He did not contact Solberg for a morning update. He did not consult the other Sherpas. At 5:30, he woke Callum and Jonas and told them conditions looked good for descent. Callum asked about the forecast. Marcus told him the forecast showed acceptable conditions. That was technically not a lie. It was a description that removed everything important. Jonas asked how long the descent would take. Marcus said 6 to 8 hours to Camp 2, standard. He'd done this route before. At 6:20, Callum and Jonas began their final preparation. At 6:45, Dawa Tenzin approached Marcus outside the tents. According to Dawa's later statement, he asked Marcus directly whether they were still routing through the upper corridor. Marcus said yes. Dawa asked Marcus if he'd factored in the wind loading from the previous 3 days. Marcus said he had. Dawa said, "I'm not going up that section." Marcus said, "You don't have to." That sentence ended the conversation. Dawa did not escalate further. He was an employee. Marcus was the expedition leader. There was a hierarchy, and inside that hierarchy, Marcus's word was final. Dawa retreated to his tent. 2 other Sherpas who had planned to support the descent also quietly removed themselves from the route without a direct confrontation. Nobody told Callum. Nobody told Jonas. At 10:30 in the morning, after a slower than expected initial descent due to exhaustion, Callum and Jonas entered the upper corridor. They were roped together. Standard practice. The rope was a 40-meter dynamic line. In normal conditions, a 40-meter rope on a descent is a safety measure. It means if one person slips, the other can arrest the fall. On a slab avalanche, a 40-meter rope means something different. It means 2 people move together. Whatever happens to the slope happens to both of them. At 10:41, Callum radioed Marcus at Camp 3. He reported good progress. He said the snow surface felt a little uncertain, but manageable. He asked if there was anything in the latest forecast update he should know about. Marcus told him conditions were fine. Go ahead. There was no latest forecast update. Marcus hadn't requested one. At 11:20, Callum radioed again. His message was shorter. He said the snow was making sounds he didn't like. He described it as a whumping beneath the surface. That sound has a specific meaning to experienced climbers. It's a stress fracture propagating through a weak layer in the snowpack. It's the sound a slope makes before it moves. Marcus told him it was probably surface settling. Normal. Keep going. 12 minutes later, at 11:32, Callum sent a final radio message. It was 4 words. Something's not right here. Marcus asked him to describe what he was seeing. There was no response. At 11:47, Dawa Tenzin, watching from the mouth of his tent at Camp 3, saw the upper corridor release. He described it later as quiet at first. A line appeared across the slope, maybe 60 meters wide. Then the whole section below the line began to move. It wasn't a chaotic explosion. It was steady, heavy, like something inevitable that had been waiting for permission. He saw 2 figures on the slope. He saw the rope between them go taut. Then both figures disappeared into the moving snow. Dawa stood at the tent entrance for approximately 90 seconds. He did not move. He said later he couldn't process what he'd seen fast enough to react. By the time he could, there was nothing on the slope to react to. The snow had settled. The corridor was silent. The mountain looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes before. Marcus Veld came out of his tent when he heard Dawa's voice. Dawa was not screaming. He was speaking quietly, almost to himself. Marcus asked what happened. Dawa looked at him and said, "They're gone." Marcus stood there for 11 seconds. He described this himself, later in an interview before picking up the radio. The window for turning back had closed at 11:32, when Callum said something wasn't right. But the window for preventing all of it had closed the night before, at 9:45, when Marcus read the forecast and decided to keep it to himself. What the snow did on October 9th was not a surprise. What it buried and what it revealed would take months to fully understand. Chapter 4. The avalanche, 11:47 in the morning, October 9th. The slab released along a fracture line at approximately 6,900 meters. The weak layer beneath the slab had been building for 3 days. Wind deposited snow, uneven loading. the exact conditions Solberg's forecast had identified at 4:53 that morning. The slab was 62 meters wide. Depth at the crown was approximately 70 centimeters. That's not a large avalanche by mountain standards. It was enough. Callum was leading the descent. Jonas was 4 meters behind him, upslope. The rope ran between them. When the slab fractured, Callum was standing directly in the release zone. Jonas was on the upper edge of it. The snow moved at an estimated 45 kilometers per hour within the first 10 seconds. Callum went down immediately. No time to react. No time to self-arrest. The force was horizontal and vertical simultaneously. He was off his feet in under 2 seconds. The rope pulled taut. Jonas had 1 second where the rope was taut, and he was still standing. 1 second where he might have been able to drive his axe into the slope above the fracture line and hold. He didn't make it. The snow reached him before the thought could become an action. Both men went into the slide together. The avalanche ran approximately 400 meters before losing energy on a lower angle section of the slope. The debris field spread across roughly 300 square meters of terrain. Dawa saw it stop from Camp 3. He saw the debris settle. He did not see any movement in it. He called down to base camp at 11:52. His voice was flat. He said there had been an avalanche in the upper corridor. He said Callum and Jonas were in it. He said he could not see them. Base camp went silent for 4 seconds. Then the base camp manager, a woman named Priya Menon, asked Dawa to repeat what he'd said. He repeated it. Priya immediately contacted the other expeditions operating on the south side. She needed eyes. She needed anyone who might have line of sight to the debris field. At 12:19, a climbing team from a separate expedition confirmed they could see the debris from their position. They reported no visible figures, no color, no movement. At 12:41, Dawa and one other Sherpa began moving toward the debris field. They had probes. They had shovels. At 6,900 meters, with 2 people missing in a debris field spanning 300 square meters, 2 people with probes and shovels are not a rescue operation. They are the beginning of a recovery. Neither of them said that out loud. Marcus Veld remained at Camp 3. He reported later that he was coordinating communications. Priya Menon from base camp later said the radio traffic from Marcus during those hours was minimal. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Dawa located something with his probe at a depth of approximately 160 centimeters. He started digging. It took 40 minutes. What he uncovered was Callum Reese. He was on his back. His axe was still strapped to his wrist. The rope was still attached to his harness. The other end of the rope ran deeper into the debris field at a downslope angle. Dawa checked for a pulse. There was none. He estimated Callum had been dead for approximately 90 minutes. He called base camp. He said they had found one of them. He said it was Callum. He said there was no pulse. Priya asked about Jonas. Dawa looked at the rope running into the snow below Callum's position. He said, "The rope goes down. We'll keep digging." They dug for another 3 hours. The rope ended at 190 centimeters depth. The end of the rope was clean, not frayed, not cut. The carabiner that should have connected to Jonas's harness was open. The gate was open. The carabiner had not failed. It had not broken. Under sufficient force in the right angle of loading, a carabiner gate can open. It's rare. It happens. Jonas Berger was no longer attached to that rope. He had been carried past Callum's burial point during the slide, separated when the carabiner gate opened, and carried further by the moving snow. His body was never found. Dawa marked Callum's position. He and the other Sherpa descended to Camp 3 as darkness approached. They could not continue the search in the dark at that altitude without becoming casualties themselves. At base camp, Priya Menon made 2 phone calls. The first was to the expedition's emergency contact coordinator. The second was to the Pakistani liaison office to formally report the incident. She did not call Callum's family. She did not call Jonas's family. Those calls would come later, from people at the company's European office. Callum's sister, Fiona, got the call at 11:45 in the evening, Scottish time. She was told there had been an incident. She was told they were still gathering information. She was told they would call again in the morning. She sat by the phone all night. Fiona told investigators later that the hardest part of that night wasn't the uncertainty. It was this. At some point, she realized the call wasn't coming until morning, because morning was easier for the people making it. Not for her, for them. Jonas's mother, Ingrid Berger, received a call from a Summit Arc representative at 6 in the morning, German time. The representative told her Jonas had been involved in an avalanche. When she asked if he was alive, the representative told her, They were still working to confirm the situation. Jonas had been dead for 18 hours. Ingrid Berger later said, in a written statement she published herself, "They knew. They called me anyway and pretended they didn't." At Camp 3, Marcus Feld sent a single message to the Summit Arc operations team at 9:47 that night. It read, "Lost 2 clients in AV incident on South Descent Corridor. Conditions were within acceptable parameters. No guide error." He sent that message before either family had been officially notified of the deaths. The mountain was quiet. The debris field was dark. Somewhere beneath the snow, Jonas Berger remained. The search was not over, but the dying was. Chapter 5. Aftermath and Investigation. The Pakistani military helicopter reached Annapurna Base Camp at 7:31 in the morning on October 11th. The flight had been delayed 36 hours by weather at lower altitude. The pilot was an experienced rescue coordinator named Captain Farhan Qureshi, who had been involved in 9 previous Himalayan recovery operations. He knew before takeoff what this would be. At this altitude, after this time in a debris field that had already partially consolidated from temperature cycling, a recovery was possible. A rescue was not. The helicopter couldn't land near the debris field. The terrain and altitude made it impossible. Captain Qureshi landed at base camp and coordinated with the ground team from there. 3 additional Sherpas, brought in from a neighboring expedition with permission from their team, joined Dawa in a second search of the debris zone on October 11th. They probed for 6 hours. They found no trace of Jonas Berger. Callum's body was recovered from the debris field and transported to base camp on October 12th. He was then flown to the nearest Pakistani city with an airstrip and transferred to the care of the consulate. He was returned to Scotland 17 days after he died. Jonas's body remained on the mountain. It still does. The official investigation was opened by the Pakistan Alpine Club Safety Committee in late October. The investigator assigned was a retired mountaineering official named Tariq Hussain, who had handled 4 previous commercial expedition fatality investigations. The investigation ran for 11 weeks. The final report, published in January, identified the cause of death as avalanche and traumatic injury during descent. Contributing factors listed were adverse snow conditions and climber judgment. The report noted that the expedition had received a weather forecast indicating elevated avalanche risk, and that the decision to proceed was made by qualified expedition leadership in accordance with standard commercial guiding practices. That phrase, standard commercial guiding practices, became the line that defined what the investigation did and did not examine. It did not examine the content of Marcus Feld's 5:17 a.m. response to Solberg's forecast. It did not interview Solberg. It did not interview Priya Menon about the timeline of family notifications. It did not contact the 2 Sherpas who had independently removed themselves from the descent route before Callum and Jonas entered the corridor. It interviewed Dawa Tenzin once, for 40 minutes. Dawa's account of his conversation with Marcus, the one where Marcus told him the clients had paid for a summit, was recorded. It was not included in the final summary. When Dawa asked the investigator why, he was told it could not be verified. Callum's sister Fiona read the final report in February. She called it a document designed to protect the industry. She hired a lawyer the same week. Jonas's mother, Ingrid, released a public statement in March. She didn't use legal language. She used plain language. She listed point by point every question the investigation had failed to answer. The statement was picked up by several European outdoor media publications. Summit Arc's management sent her a legal letter 2 weeks later requesting she remove it. She did not remove it. Survivor accounts from the 4 clients who had turned back before the summit attempt were taken by investigators in written form. All 4 stated they had not been informed of the elevated avalanche forecast before the expedition summit push. All 4 stated that Marcus had presented conditions as manageable throughout the expedition. One of the 4, a Dutch client named Wouter Jansen, stated that on October 7th, 2 days before the avalanche, he had overheard Marcus on a satellite call telling someone at Summit Arc's operations office that the window is narrow and I'm not pulling the clients now. Wouter could not hear the other side of the call. He did not know at the time what was being discussed. He included it in his statement because he thought it might be relevant. The investigation noted his statement. It did not follow up. The camera footage was different. Callum had been wearing a small chest-mounted action camera during the descent. The camera was recovered with his body. It had been running. 44 minutes of footage was intact. The footage showed the descent from Callum's perspective. It showed the condition of the snow surface. It showed the route. It showed at 11:20, Callum stopping and looking at the snow surface for approximately 12 seconds before continuing. It showed at 11:32, Callum pressing the radio button. It also showed something else. At 11:23, 19 minutes before the avalanche, Callum's camera captured audio of a radio transmission he received. The transmission was not from Marcus. It was from the separate expedition team that had line of sight to the debris field hours later. Their lead guide, a French alpinist named Edouard Renard, had apparently tried to reach Callum directly after seeing the snow conditions in the upper corridor from a different angle. Renard's voice, on the recovered audio, said, "Callum, if you can hear this, we are watching your descent from our position. The slope above you looks loaded. I would strongly consider an alternate route." The audio was slightly broken, but audible. Callum's radio crackled. He adjusted his pack. He kept moving. The investigation report did not mention Edouard Renard. It did not mention the radio transmission. Fiona's lawyer discovered the audio during a separate review of the camera footage that Fiona had commissioned independently. Someone had listened to that footage before Fiona's team did. The investigation team had received a copy of the camera file. Renard's warning was in it. Clear enough to hear. It had been transcribed nowhere. The official story said Callum proceeded despite knowing about one warning the general forecast. The camera proved he received a second warning. Direct, specific, real-time, 19 minutes before the slope released. And kept moving, which means the question was no longer just about what Marcus told him. The question became, what had they told Callum that made him trust the route so completely that he kept moving after Edouard Renard said stop? Chapter 6. What was hidden and what it means. 6 months after Callum and Jonas died, a post appeared on a mountaineering community forum. It was written under an account with no previous activity. The username was dtenzin89. The post was 4 paragraphs long. It named Marcus Veld by name. It described the conversation at Camp 3 the night before the descent, word for word. The same account Dawa had given investigators and that had not appeared in the official report. It described Marcus reading the forecast and saying noted. It described Dawa warning him about the corridor. It included one line that had not been in Dawa's official statement, a line he had held back until he understood what the investigation was going to do with everything else he'd said. That line was, "Before I left his tent, Mr. Veld said to me, 'Dawa, the clients have already paid. I'm not sending them down a different route because of a number on a forecast.'" The post had screenshots. It had a photo of Dawa's written notes from that evening, written in Nepali, with a translation attached. The climbing community read it within hours. By the following morning, it had been shared over 3,000 times. Summit Arc issued a statement calling the post defamatory and unverifiable. They announced they were consulting legal counsel. They never filed a lawsuit against Dawa. Fiona Reese's lawyer had been waiting for something like this. Within 2 weeks of Dawa's post, the legal team filed a civil action against Summit Arc in the Netherlands on behalf of Callum's estate. Ingrid Berger filed a parallel action in Germany on behalf of Jonas's estate. Discovery in Fiona's case produced several internal Summit Arc documents that had not been provided to the original investigation. Among them were 3 email exchanges between Marcus Veld and Summit Arc's operations director, dated between October 6th and October 8th, the days immediately preceding the disaster. In those emails, Marcus noted the deteriorating snow conditions on multiple occasions. He raised the possibility of changing the descent route. The operations director's responses were consistent across all 3 exchanges. One response read, "Summit success is what we sell, Marcus. If conditions aren't fatal, we go. Not fatal." That was the threshold. The operations director's name was Stefan Koss. He had been with Summit Arc for 9 years. He was not on the mountain. He had never climbed above 7,000 meters. He wrote, "If conditions aren't fatal, we go," from an office in Amsterdam. The emails became public through the civil proceedings. Stefan Koss resigned from Summit Arc before a journalist could reach him for comment. Marcus Veld's response to discovery of those emails was to issue a statement saying he had expressed concerns to Summit Arc leadership and had been encouraged to proceed. He characterized himself for the first time as someone who had been under institutional pressure. He did not apologize to either family. Most people, when they heard about those emails, concluded that Marcus was simply following orders from a company that prioritized profit over safety. That framing made the story clean. One villain at the top, one leader caught in the middle, 2 dead climbers at the bottom. But that framing leaves out something important. Marcus had the authority to abort the descent. That authority is not theoretical, it is written into every commercial expedition contract. The expedition leader has final say on safety decisions. Stefan Koss could email whatever he wanted. Marcus was the one standing at 6,900 meters with a radio in his hand. And Marcus was the one who, when Callum called in at 11:32 and said, "Something's not right here," told him it was probably surface settling. Nobody forced Marcus to say that. The camera footage also resolved the question of what Callum had been told that made him keep moving after Renard's warning. Callum's audio recovered one more transmission. At 11:37, 5 minutes before the slope released, Marcus's voice, clear and calm, said, "Conditions are within range. I've been watching from Camp 3. Keep going." Callum kept going because the man he trusted told him to keep going. He had given his trust to someone who had already decided the answer before checking the facts. Edouard Renard gave a statement to climbing media after Dawa's post went public. He confirmed he had attempted to contact Callum directly on October 9th after observing the snow in the upper quarter from his team's position. He said he had not reported the transmission to the investigation because he had not been asked. He had assumed the investigation would recover the camera footage and find it themselves. He assumed correctly. They found it. They chose not to include it. The investigation summary had been signed off by Tariq Hussein. Hussein retired from the Alpine Club Safety Committee 4 months after the report was published. He did not give interviews. The Summit Arc civil cases settled out of court in Germany and the Netherlands within 18 months. The settlement terms included non-disclosure agreements. Neither family accepted the NDA clauses. Both families received compensation that has not been publicly disclosed. Both stated publicly that the amount was inadequate. Fiona Reese said, "No number changes what happened. I wanted them to say it out loud. They never did." Ingrid Berger said, "I don't have a grave to visit. My son is in the snow on that mountain. What Summit Arc settled for is irrelevant to me. I wanted accountability. I got paperwork." The pattern Dawa's post identified commercial pressure overriding safety decisions on guided 8,000er expeditions was not unique to Summit Arc. 3 separate incidents on other Himalayan peaks in the previous 4 years showed the same structure. Internal forecasts or warnings received. Clients not informed. Summit pushes continued. Deaths followed. Investigations produced bland conclusions. Callum and Jonas were not unusual victims of an unusual company. They were the most visible example of a system that runs exactly as designed until it produces bodies. Whether anything about that system actually changed is a different question, and the answer to that question is more complicated than anyone involved wanted it to be. Chapter 7. What remains 2 things changed after Callum and Jonas died. One of them matters. One of them doesn't matter enough. In May of the following year, the Pakistan Alpine Club updated its commercial expedition safety guidelines. The new guidelines require that all expedition clients receive daily meteorological forecasts directly from the contracted forecaster, not filtered through expedition leadership. Clients must acknowledge receipt. Expedition leaders cannot proceed to a summit push or a technical descent on a day when the forecast rates avalanche risk at 4 or above without written client confirmation that they have read and understood the forecast. That specific change direct forecast delivery to clients came directly from Fiona Reese's legal team, who submitted a recommendation to the Alpine Club as part of their case. The Alpine Club adopted it. It is now a formal requirement. In the 2023 Himalayan season, this protocol flagged 11 separate situations where clients were shown a 4-level forecast before a planned summit push. 7 of those teams delayed or rerouted. 4 proceeded with full client awareness. None of those teams lost anyone to an avalanche. That is real. It is a genuine consequence of what happened to Callum and Jonas. Somewhere there are people alive who might not be. But here's what hasn't changed. Summit Arc dissolved and reformed under a different name within 2 years. The same structure, commercial guiding, high permits, pressure to deliver summits operates on every major 8,000er today. Eric Solberg, the forecaster, still works in high-altitude meteorology. He gave one interview after the case. He said, "I provided accurate forecasts. I cannot control what expedition leaders do with them." He's correct. And that correctness is part of the problem. The threshold question, not whether conditions are good, but whether they are fatal enough to stop, has not changed in any formal way. Commercial expeditions still operate in the space between safe and fatal. They always will. That space is where the business model lives. 14 climbers have died on Annapurna's south side since Callum and Jonas. Not all of them were on commercial expeditions. Not all of them involved ignored forecasts, but 3 of those 14 deaths occurred in circumstances that investigators later described in separate reports as foreseeable given available data. Douwe Tenzin no longer works for commercial guiding companies. He guides independent trekking groups at altitude below 5,000 meters in Nepal. He still lives in the same village he grew up in. He has given no interviews since his forum post. He responded once to a journalist's message with a single sentence. "I said what needed to be said. That's all I had to do." Edouard Renard returned to guiding on the following season. He now requires as a personal policy that any expedition he works on has a channel for client-to-client or client-to-external communication that is not routed through expedition leadership. No single person between climbers and information. He has spoken about Callum and Jonas at 2 alpine safety conferences. Marcus Veld has not guided an expedition since the disaster. He gave one extended interview to an outdoor media outlet approximately a year after the civil case is settled. In it, he said he had carried the weight of those decisions every day. He said he had believed the conditions were manageable. He said he had been under pressure he had not adequately resisted. He said he was sorry. He did not say sorry to either family publicly before the interviewer asked him to. Stefan Koss, the Summit Arc operations director, who wrote, "If conditions aren't fatal, we go," has not made any public statement. He has not been charged with any criminal offense. He lives in Amsterdam. Callum's body was returned to Scotland and buried near the coastal town where he grew up. His sister Fiona visits the grave on his birthday, and on October 9th, she said in a public statement in the second year after the disaster, "I don't want people to remember Callum as someone who was reckless. He wasn't reckless. He was trusting. He trusted the system around him to keep him informed. That system failed him. I want people to remember that. Not that Callum made a mistake, but that the mistake was made for him." Jonas Berger remains on Annapurna. His mother Ingrid has not returned to the mountain and does not plan to. She established a small foundation in Jonas's name that funds safety training for Sherpa guides, specifically training on how to escalate safety concerns to outside parties when expedition leadership will not act. The foundation has trained 61 Sherpas across 3 seasons. Ingrid said, "Jonas made a list of the controllable risk factors on Annapurna before he went. Ignoring avalanche forecasts was on the list. He underlined it. I think about that all the time, that he knew it was a risk, and he trusted the people around him to manage it. I'm not angry at Jonas. I'm angry at the people who took that trust and treated it like it was inconvenient." Callum's axe, the one still strapped to his wrist when Douwe found him, was returned with his body. Fiona kept it. It hangs in her hallway. She said she kept it because it was the last thing he held, because it means he was fighting, even at the end. Here's what this story is actually about. It's not about avalanches. Avalanches happen on mountains. They always will. The question is never whether a slope can release. The question is who decides to stand on it, and what they were told, and whether the person with the information chose to share it. Callum Reese was methodical. He checked conditions obsessively. He turned back on Manaslu rather than risk his partner's life. He was, by every account from everyone who climbed with him, exactly the kind of person who should have survived. He didn't survive because the information he needed to make the right decision was withheld from him by someone who had decided the answer before checking the question. That's the specific failure here. Not ego, not recklessness, a system in which the person with the most to lose has the least access to the information that would let them choose differently. Callum's camera captured 44 minutes of his final descent. His family has watched some of it. Fiona has watched all of it. She has described it publicly only once. She said, "He was calm. He was careful. He was doing everything right." And then the last thing on the footage before the camera goes dark is him looking up at the slope above him. Just looking. You can see him thinking. You can see him trying to figure out if something's wrong. He was trying to figure it out. He didn't have enough information to figure it out. That's not a failure of judgment. That's a failure of the system that was supposed to give him what he needed. The rope between Callum and Jonas didn't fail. The carabiner opened under force. That's a mechanical fact, but the rope was a metaphor for everything else that was supposed to hold them together on that mountain. The chain of information, the chain of trust, the chain of responsibility that runs from forecasters to operations directors to expedition leaders to the climbers standing in the corridor. Every link in that chain failed before the slope moved. The rope didn't run out on Annapurna. Everything else did. If you've watched this far, you understand something that most people who hear about this disaster don't. You understand that the avalanche was the last thing that happened, not the first. The real story was in the tent at 6,900 meters the night before, in the emails from Amsterdam, in the radio call at 11:37. Tell someone about it. Share this if it made you think differently about how these disasters actually happen. And if you want to go deeper next, we're covering the case of a guided expedition where the summit was reached, the descent went wrong, and the emergency response revealed a level of coordination failure that makes this one look like a misunderstanding. Leave a comment below about which part of this story you found most difficult to accept. The answer tells you something about what you believe about accountability. Callum's sister still picks up the phone every Sunday. Force of habit, she says. Then she remembers. Some habits outlast the people who made them possible.